Most people want to win, but very few are willing to do what winning actually requires. That's the gap. And that gap is where the top 1% live. Beating 99% of people isn't about being smarter, more gifted, or luckier. It's about understanding a simple truth. The bar is embarrassingly low because most people won't sustain effort when it stops being exciting. Here's what nobody tells you. You don't need extreme intelligence. You don't need perfect timing. You don't need to reinvent anything. You just need to do the obvious things for an unreasonably long period of time. That's it. The reason this works is because almost no one does it. They start strong, burn hot, then disappear. They confuse intensity with progress and motivation with commitment. If you show up when it's boring, when it's repetitive, when there's no applause, you immediately separate yourself. While others are looking for shortcuts, you're stacking days. While others are waiting to feel ready, you're executing imperfectly. While others are negotiating with themselves, you're following through. The reality is harsh but empowering. Most people are inconsistent, distracted, and emotionally driven. If you can control your actions regardless of how you feel, you've already passed the majority. If you can delay gratification just a little longer than everyone else, time starts working for you instead of against you. Winning isn't loud. It doesn't look impressive in the beginning. It looks like doing the same small things every day with no guarantee of results. But that's the formula. And if you're willing to accept that, to embrace the boredom, to stay when others leave, you won't just compete with the 99%. You'll leave them so far behind they won't even see how it happened. Most people believe that success is reserved for the talented, the lucky, or the exceptionally intelligent, and that belief alone already puts them behind. The truth is far more uncomfortable and far more empowering at the same time. Beating 99% of people has almost nothing to do with talent and almost everything to do with consistency. Talent gets attention, but consistency gets results. Talent might give someone a head start, but consistency decides who actually finishes the race. When you look closely at outcomes over long periods of time, the people who win are rarely the most gifted in the room. They're the ones who kept showing up long after the excitement wore off. Consistency is boring, repetitive, and unglamorous, which is exactly why it works. Most people are addicted to novelty. They want new strategies, new routines, new opportunities, and new motivation every week. The moment progress slows or effort feels heavy, they interpret that discomfort as a sign to stop or switch paths. This is where the majority fall off. Not because they couldn't do the work, but because they couldn't do the work, or because they couldn't do the work when it stopped being emotionally rewarding. If you can perform the same basic actions day after day, regardless of mood, you instantly separate yourself from almost everyone else. Talent without consistency creates potential that never materializes. You see it everywhere. Smart people who never follow through, skilled individuals who start strong and fade, ambitious starters who never finish. On the other hand, consistency turns average ability into extraordinary outcomes. Small actions repeated daily compound in ways that are invisible at first, but overwhelming over time. Reading 10 pages a day doesn't feel impressive. Exercising for 30 minutes doesn't feel heroic. Working on a skill for one focused hour doesn't feel life-changing. But when those actions are repeated for months and years, the results become impossible to ignore. The reason consistency beats talent is because life rewards reliability, not flashes of brilliance. The world doesn't care how good you could be. It rewards what you actually deliver, again and again. Consistent effort builds trust with yourself first. Every time you do what you said you would do, you reinforce your identity as someone who follows through. That identity becomes a self-fulfilling advantage. You stop relying on motivation and start relying on systems. You don't ask whether you feel like doing the work. You simply do it because that's who you are. Most people wait for the perfect conditions to act. They wait to feel confident, inspired, or ready. Consistent people act first and let confidence catch up later. They understand that clarity comes from action, not from thinking. By moving daily, even imperfectly, they gather feedback, adjust, and improve while others remain stuck planning. Over time, this creates a massive gap. While others are still deciding, the consistent person has already accumulated experience, skill, and momentum. Consistency also protects you from emotional decision-making. Motivation is unreliable. It spikes and crashes based on sleep, stress, and circumstances. Discipline rooted in consistency doesn't negotiate with feelings. It creates a baseline of effort that happens no matter what. On bad days, consistency keeps you from quitting. On good days, it keeps you from overestimating yourself. This balance is what allows long-term progress instead of short bursts, followed by burnout. Another overlooked advantage of consistency is how it lowers the bar for daily effort. You don't need heroic willpower if the actions are small and repeatable. Consistent people don't aim to win the day. They aim to not break the chain. They understand that missing once is an accident, but missing twice is the start of a new habit. By protecting their streaks, they protect their future results. This mindset makes progress inevitable rather than hopeful. When you rely on talent, you tend to protect your ego. You avoid situations where you might fail or look inexperienced. When you rely on consistency, failure becomes part of the process. You expect mistakes, you expect slow progress. That expectation removes fear and replaces it with patience. Over time, patience becomes a competitive advantage because most people quit right before results start to show. Beating 99% of people doesn't require you to be exceptional on any single day. It requires you to be dependable across thousands of days. That's the paradox. What feels ordinary in the moment becomes extraordinary in hindsight. The person who trains when they're tired, works when no one is watching, and improves by small margins every day doesn't look impressive early on, but eventually they become undeniable, not because they were born better, but because they stayed consistent long enough for the math to work in their favor. Most people don't fail because they lack ability, resources, or opportunity. They fail because they quit too early. Endurance is the advantage that quietly eliminates competition without requiring you to be better than anyone else. When you look at almost any field, the number of people who start is massive, but the number who stay long enough to see results is shockingly small. Time does most of the filtering. If you can outlast others, you don't need to outperform them. The early stages of any pursuit are deceptive. Progress feels fast at first because everything is new. You get small wins, external validation, and a sense of momentum. Then the plateau hits. Results slow down. Effort stays the same or increases. Feedback disappears. This is the exact moment when most people leave. They assume something is wrong, that they chose the wrong path, or that they're not cut out for it. In reality, this phase is normal. It's the cost of entry for meaningful results. Endurance is simply the willingness to stay when the rewards are delayed. What makes endurance so powerful is that it requires no special talent. It doesn't demand creativity or intelligence. It demands patience and emotional control. Most people are not trained to tolerate long periods of uncertainty. They want reassurance that their effort will pay off. And when they don't get it, they pull out. If you can continue working without guarantees, you immediately separate yourself from the majority. You stop playing a short-term game and start benefiting from long-term math. Quitting early often feels rational. People tell themselves they're being realistic, that they're cutting losses, that they're pivoting strategically. But in most cases, quitting is an emotional response disguised as logic. Discomfort shows up as boredom, frustration, or self-doubt. And instead of learning to carry that discomfort, people escape it. Endurance means accepting that discomfort is not a signal to stop, but a sign that you're still in the game. Another reason endurance beats others is because skills compound slowly. Competence doesn't grow in a straight line. It builds through repetition, failure, and correction. If you quit early, you exit before the curve turns in your favor. You walk away right before the accumulation of effort starts producing visible results. The people who endure long enough benefit from work they did months or years ago, while everyone else resets to zero by starting something new. Endurance also reshapes identity. When you stay through difficult phases, you begin to see yourself differently. You stop identifying as someone who tries and start identifying as someone who finishes. That shift changes how you approach challenges. Instead of asking whether something is worth continuing, you assume continuation is the default. This identity makes future endurance easier, because you no longer debate quitting every time things get hard. There's also a massive competitive advantage in simply being available over time. Opportunities often come to those who are still around when timing aligns. Many people would have succeeded if they had stayed just a little longer. They were one iteration away, one connection away, one adjustment away. Endurance keeps you in the room long enough for luck to find you. Quitting early guarantees you won't be there when conditions improve. Endurance doesn't mean blind persistence. It means staying engaged while adjusting strategy. The people who last are not the ones who repeat the same mistakes forever, but the ones who keep moving while refining their approach. They collect feedback, adapt, and continue. Most people either grind without reflection or reflect without action. Endurance balances both, allowing progress without burnout. The longer you endure, the smaller the competition becomes. Every month you stay, fewer people remain. Every year you continue, the field thins further. Eventually, you're no longer competing with the masses. You're competing with a handful of individuals who also refuse to quit. At that point, the odds are heavily in your favor, not because you became extraordinary overnight, but because you were willing to stay ordinary for longer than everyone else was comfortable with. Endurance transforms time from an enemy into an ally. Instead of racing against others, you let time remove them for you. You don't need explosive growth, viral moments, or sudden breakthroughs. You need durability, the ability to keep going when progress is slow, recognition is absent, and effort feels thankless. That quiet persistence is what most people underestimate. It's exactly why it works. If you can stay when others leave, you eventually inherit the space they abandon. Most people are attracted to what looks exciting, impressive, or advanced. They want the hacks, the secrets, the strategies that sound intelligent and feel exclusive. What they avoid are the boring fundamentals, the simple actions that don't generate praise or instant results. This avoidance is exactly why focusing on fundamentals becomes such a powerful advantage. The basics are not hard to understand, but they are hard to respect, and that disrespect creates opportunity for anyone willing to lean into them. Fundamentals are uncomfortable because they offer no illusion of progress. Sending outreach messages daily, practicing a skill repeatedly, tracking numbers, refining a basic process, sleeping well, eating properly, and showing up on time do not feel impressive. There is no dopamine hit from doing what you already know you should be doing. Most people crave novelty because novelty feels like movement, even when it produces nothing. Fundamentals feel slow, which is why people abandon them prematurely. The irony is that fundamentals never stop working. They don't become obsolete. They don't depend on trends or platforms. They are the foundation every advanced result is built on. The problem is that fundamentals demand humility. They force you to accept that success is not about cleverness, but about execution. This bruises the ego, so people search for complexity to feel special instead. The moment you remove ego from the equation, fundamentals become obvious leverage. People avoid fundamentals because they are measurable. You can't hide from numbers when you're doing the basics. Did you make the calls or not? Did you practice or not? Did you publish or not? Did you train or not? Advanced tactics allow people to stay vague and theoretical. Fundamentals force accountability, and accountability is uncomfortable for anyone who wants to protect their self-image without changing their behavior. Another reason fundamentals work is because they create consistency by default. Advanced strategies often require high levels of focus, timing, or creativity. Fundamentals require presence and repetition. They are forgiving. You can do them imperfectly and still make progress. This lowers the barrier to action. While others are waiting for optimal conditions, the person focused on fundamentals is accumulating reps. Focusing on fundamentals also accelerates learning. Repetition exposes weaknesses quickly. When you do the basics every day, patterns emerge. You start seeing what actually matters and what doesn't. You develop intuition that cannot be learned from theory alone. People who skip fundamentals stay stuck at the surface level, constantly consuming information but rarely internalizing it. Mastery only comes from repeated contact with the core actions of a skill. Most people underestimate how rare it is to do simple things well for a long time. They assume everyone else is doing the basics too, so they look for an edge elsewhere. In reality, very few people execute fundamentals consistently. This creates a massive gap that widens over time. The person who does the basics daily looks average at first, then suddenly looks unstoppable, even though nothing changed except duration. Fundamentals also scale better than complexity. When pressure increases, complex systems break. Fundamentals hold. In high-stress situations, people fall back to their training. If that training is rooted in basics, performance remains stable. If it's built on fragile tactics, it collapses. This is why professionals obsess over fundamentals even when they are capable of advanced execution. They understand that reliability beats flash. Another overlooked benefit of fundamentals is confidence. Not the loud kind, but the quiet kind that comes from knowing you've done the work. When you focus on fundamentals, you don't need external validation. You know where you stand because your actions are visible and repeatable. This reduces anxiety and second-guessing. You stop chasing reassurance and start trusting process. People who avoid fundamentals often jump from opportunity to opportunity, hoping the next thing will finally work. People who embrace fundamentals stay put long enough to extract value. They improve margins instead of switching games. Over time, this depth compounds into expertise. Others see the result and assume there was a secret, not realizing the secret was patience with the basics. Focusing on fundamentals is not about settling for less. It's about building a base that can support more. Advanced results are fragile without a strong foundation. The people who dominate any field are not doing exotic things daily. They are doing simple things exceptionally well, long after everyone else got bored, long after it stopped being exciting, and long after quitting would have been easier. Most people are drawn to what feels advanced because it feeds their ego. They want strategies that sound intelligent, tools that look sophisticated, and systems that make them feel ahead of others. What they quietly avoid are the fundamentals, the basic actions that don't impress anyone and don't create instant feedback. This avoidance is not accidental. Fundamentals expose effort. They remove excuses. They make it painfully clear whether work is being done or not. and that level of clarity is uncomfortable for most people. Fundamentals are boring by design. They don't change much over time. They don't change much over time. They don't adapt to trends. They don't offer novelty. Showing up on time, practicing core skills, repeating the same essential actions, tracking simple metrics, and refining basic processes feels dull compared to chasing new ideas. But boredom is precisely why fundamentals work. Most people can tolerate boredom for a few days, maybe a few weeks. Very few can tolerate it for years. That gap in tolerance creates a massive advantage. People often say they want results, but what they really want is stimulation. Fundamentals offer results without stimulation, which is why they're ignored. Making daily calls, writing consistently, practicing the same movement, reviewing mistakes, or studying core principles doesn't feel exciting. There's no rush, no immediate reward. Yet these actions are the exact inputs that create long-term outcomes. The person who accepts boredom as part of progress immediately separates themselves from the majority who constantly need to feel engaged. Another reason fundamentals are avoided is because they leave no place to hide. When you focus on basics, performance becomes measurable. Either the work was done or it wasn't. Either the reps happened or they didn't. Advanced tactics allow people to stay abstract. They can talk, plan, analyze, and theorize without ever confronting execution. Fundamentals force accountability, and accountability threatens the comfort of self-deception. Fundamentals also challenge identity. Many people want to see themselves as advanced before they've earned it. They want to skip the stage of being average, but fundamentals keep you grounded in reality. They remind you that mastery is built from repetition, not self-image. This is why people abandon basics as soon as they gain a little competence. They feel it's beneath them, not realizing that staying with fundamentals is what turns competence into dominance. The people who win long-term are not obsessed with being clever. They're obsessed with being reliable. Fundamentals create reliability. They are simple enough to repeat under stress, fatigue, and distraction. When pressure increases, people don't rise to the level of their ambitions, they fall to the level of their habits. If those habits are rooted in fundamentals, performance remains stable. If they're rooted in fragile strategies, everything collapses. There is also a compounding effect that comes from fundamentals that most people overlook. Repetition builds efficiency. Efficiency builds confidence. Confidence reduces friction. Over time, what once felt difficult becomes automatic. This frees mental energy to improve quality rather than fight resistance. People who skip fundamentals never experience this compounding because they're constantly restarting with new approaches. Fundamentals accelerate learning because they expose patterns. When you do the same core actions repeatedly, you start noticing what actually moves the needle. You stop guessing and start knowing. This kind of understanding can't be downloaded or shortcut. It only comes from sustained exposure to the basics. People who chase novelty stay shallow. People who embrace fundamentals go deep. Another advantage of focusing on fundamentals is that they scale. As volume increases, fundamentals hold. As complexity increases, fundamentals sort it. Advanced tactics are multipliers, but without a base, multipliers amplify weakness. This is why people who skip fundamentals often experience rapid growth followed by collapse. The structure can't support the weight. Fundamentals quietly strengthen the structure over time. Most people underestimate how rare it is to do simple things consistently and well. They assume everyone else is doing it, so they look elsewhere for an edge. In reality, consistency with fundamentals is uncommon. That's why it works. While others rotate between methods, the person focused on basics compounds effort in one direction. Years later, the gap looks dramatic, even though the actions never changed. Fundamentals also build quiet confidence. Not the loud confidence that needs validation, but the internal confidence that comes from knowing the work was done. This reduces anxiety, hesitation, and second-guessing. You stop wondering if you're on the right path, because your actions give you proof. That proof is stabilizing. It allows you to stay patient while others panic and pivot. Focusing on fundamentals doesn't mean rejecting improvement or growth. It means earning advancement instead of chasing it. The people who dominate any field don't do exotic things daily. They do simple things relentlessly. They stay with the basics long after the excitement fades, long after the praise disappears, and long after most people decide it's not worth it. And that willingness to commit to what others ignore is what quietly creates separation over time. Most people think time is something that works against them. They feel late, behind, or pressured to catch up, so they rush decisions and chase fast results. This impatience becomes a liability. Time is not the enemy. Impatience is. When used patiently, time becomes the most powerful form of leverage available because it magnifies small advantages into overwhelming outcomes. The people who understand this stop trying to compress decades into months and instead focus on positioning themselves to benefit from duration. Time rewards those who stay in the game. Every day you remain consistent, learning, practicing, and executing. You are accumulating invisible assets. Skills deepen, judgment improves, errors decrease, relationships strengthen. None of this is dramatic in the moment, which is why most people underestimate it. They want visible progress quickly, and when they don't see it, they abandon the process. Patient people let time do the heavy lifting that effort alone cannot. The real leverage of time comes from compounding. Small actions repeated over long periods don't add up. They multiply. A slight improvement each day, sustained for years, creates results that look disproportionate to the effort invested. Most people never experience this because they interrupt the process too often. They start, stop, restart, and switch directions, constantly resetting the clock. Patient people protect continuity, allowing compounding to actually take effect. Patience also sharpens decision-making. When you're not desperate for immediate results, you make better choices. You avoid shortcuts that damage long-term outcomes. You invest in skills instead of hacks. You build foundations instead of facades. Rushed decisions often feel productive but create hidden costs that surface later. Patient decisions feel slow but reduce friction over time. This difference compounds just as much as effort does. Another way time becomes leverage is through learning curves. Early stages are inefficient. You spend more effort for less output. This discourages most people. Patient individuals accept this inefficiency as temporary. They understand that the curve eventually bends. Once skills cross a threshold, output increases while effort stabilizes. Those who quit early never reach that inflection point. Those who stay long enough benefit from it repeatedly. Time also filters competition. Every month you persist, fewer people remain. The longer the horizon, the less crowded the field. Most people are only willing to commit in short bursts. They operate on weeks and months, not years. By extending your time horizon, you reduce competition without increasing effort. You're no longer racing, you're outlasting. Patience allows you to absorb volatility without overreacting. Results fluctuate. Progress is uneven. Without patience, these fluctuations feel like failure. With patience, they're just noise. This emotional stability is critical for long-term success. Impatient people make changes at the worst times, abandoning strategies right before they start working. Patient people stay steady through temporary dips, allowing trends to reveal themselves. Time also builds credibility. Whether in business, craft, or relationships, longevity signals reliability. People trust those who have stayed consistent over time. That trust opens doors that shortcuts never can. You can't rush reputation. It's earned through repeated behavior over extended periods. Those who try to accelerate it often undermine it. Another overlooked benefit of patience is optionality. When you're not rushed, you can wait for better opportunities. You don't have to say yes to everything. You can observe, evaluate, and choose. This selectivity improves outcomes. Impatience forces people into suboptimal decisions because they feel pressure to act now. Patience creates space to act well. Most people confuse patience with passivity. In reality, patience is paired with relentless execution. You work hard, but you don't expect immediate validation. You measure progress over years, not days. This mindset keeps you focused on inputs you can control rather than outcomes you can't. Over time, this focus produces consistent growth while others burn out chasing quick wins. Time doesn't guarantee success, but it amplifies whatever strategy you're running. If your actions are aligned, time becomes an ally. If they're scattered, time exposes the lack of focus. Patient people use time intentionally. They choose a direction and let duration strengthen it. This is why time, when paired with patience, becomes unfair leverage. It allows ordinary effort to produce extraordinary results, not through intensity, but through persistence stretched across years, while most people are busy resetting, rushing, and starting over again. Most people understand the idea of delayed gratification intellectually, but very few are willing to practice it consistently. They know that sacrificing now can create more later, yet when the moment of choice arrives, comfort wins. This single pattern explains why the gap between the top 1% and everyone else keeps widening. The ability to delay gratification is not about willpower alone. It's about valuing future outcomes more than present relief, and that perspective is rare. Immediate gratification is everywhere. Immediate gratification is everywhere. Intermediate, food, validation, distractions, and shortcuts are designed to give quick rewards with minimal effort. These rewards are small, but they're instant, and the brain is wired to prefer what's immediate. Delayed gratification requires you to override that wiring and choose effort, discomfort, or patience now in exchange for something you cannot fully see yet. Most people fail this test daily, not because they are incapable, but because they never train themselves to tolerate the gap between effort and reward. The people who separate themselves are willing to operate in that gap. They work without applause, They invest without guarantees, they practice without recognition. They understand that meaningful outcomes have a lag, and they are willing to pay that price repeatedly. While others measure success by how something feels today, they measure it by where it will put them months or years from now. That shift in time horizon changes behavior completely. Delayed gratification also filters decision-making. When you prioritize long-term outcomes, many temptations lose their appeal. You stop asking what feels good now and start asking what compounds. This leads to fewer but better choices. Instead of scattering effort across many short-term wins, you concentrate it into activities that build momentum over time. Most people are busy chasing quick dopamine hits, mistaking activity for progress. Those who delay gratification are building assets instead of consuming rewards. Another reason delayed gratification creates separation is that it requires emotional regulation. Saying no to immediate pleasure often feels like loss in the moment. There's frustration, boredom, and sometimes loneliness. Most people are not comfortable sitting with those emotions, so they escape them. Those who can sit with discomfort without reacting gain an edge. They don't need to eliminate temptation, they just don't obey it. Over time, this emotional control becomes a form of strength that spills into every area of life. Delayed gratification also reinforces identity. Each time you choose the harder, longer path, you prove something to yourself. You stop seeing yourself as someone who reacts and start seeing yourself as someone who chooses. That identity becomes self-reinforcing. The more you practice delay, the easier it becomes, not because temptation disappears, but because your self-image shifts. You become the kind of person who plays the long game, and that changes what you're willing to tolerate. Most people underestimate how much leverage comes from simply waiting. Waiting to spend, waiting to respond, waiting to scale, waiting to celebrate. They rush milestones because they want proof that their effort is worth it. Those who delay gratification don't need constant proof. They trust the process because they've seen compounding work before. That trust allows them to stay calm while others panic, to stay focused while others chase novelty. There's also a practical advantage to delayed gratification skill building. Learning anything valuable involves frustration and slow progress early on. The rewards come later after repetition and refinement. People who demand quick wins quit before they become confident. People who demand quick wins quit before they become competent. People who delay gratification push through the awkward phase. They accept being bad for longer than others are willing to, and that tolerance becomes their advantage. Eventually, the skill pays dividends while everyone else has already moved on. Delayed gratification doesn't mean rejecting enjoyment. It means sequencing it. The people who win still enjoy life, but they earn their enjoyment instead of borrowing it. They understand that pleasure is richer when it follows effort. Short-term sacrifices are not viewed as punishment, but as investments. This reframing removes resentment and replaces it with intention. You're not denying yourself, you're choosing timing. The world rewards this mindset quietly. Opportunities tend to flow toward people who have prepared long before they were needed. Financial stability favors those who saved and invested instead of spending early. Influence favors those who built credibility patiently instead of chasing attention. Mastery favors those who practiced when no one was watching. None of this is visible day to day, which is why most people don't believe in it strongly enough to act on it. Delayed gratification is uncomfortable, precisely because it works. If it were easy, everyone would do it, and it would stop being an advantage. The fact that it feels unnatural, restrictive, and slow is what makes it so powerful. When you consistently choose future gains over present comfort, you stop competing with the majority, because the majority opts out early. Over time, this discipline compounds into freedom, optionality, and leverage, all built on choices that looked insignificant in the moment, but were decisive in hindsight. Most people want accountability, but only on their terms. They want deadlines imposed by others, pressure from bosses, reminders from systems, and consequences that come from the outside. What they avoid is self-accountability, because it removes every excuse. When you are self-accountable, there's no one to blame, no one to impress, and no one to negotiate with but yourself. That level of responsibility is uncomfortable, which is exactly why it becomes such a powerful competitive edge. Self-accountability means you measure yourself, honestly, even when no one is watching. You do what you said you would do, not because someone is checking, but because you decided it matters. Most people only perform when there is oversight. Take away supervision and standards drop. Effort becomes optional. Self-accountable people carry their standards with them. Their output doesn't depend on external pressure, which makes them far more consistent over time. One of the biggest advantages of self-accountability is speed. When you hold yourself responsible, You don't waste time explaining, justifying, or rationalizing. You notice a miss, you own it, and you correct it. Most people get stuck defending their behavior instead of fixing it. They protect their ego rather than their progress. Self-accountability skips the drama. It replaces excuses with adjustment. People often confuse self-accountability with self-criticism, but they are not the same. Self-criticism is emotional and vague. Self-accountability is factual and specific. It asks simple questions. Did I do what I said I would do? If not, why? What changes tomorrow? There's no shame in the process, just clarity. That clarity allows steady improvement instead of emotional swings between competence and guilt. Self-accountability also creates trust with others, even when it's invisible. People who consistently deliver without reminders become reliable. Reliability attracts responsibility, opportunity, and autonomy. When others don't have to manage you, they give you more room. That room becomes leverage. Most people want freedom before they earn trust. Self-accountable people earn trust first, and freedom follows naturally. Another overlooked benefit is how self-accountability sharpens focus. When you know you'll have to answer to yourself, distractions lose appeal. Procrastination becomes harder to justify. You stop lying to yourself about effort and start tracking reality. This makes progress measurable. Instead of vague intentions, you deal in actions completed and actions missed. That objectivity is rare, and rarity creates advantage. Self-accountability also strengthens resilience. When outcomes are poor, you don't collapse or externalize blame. You analyze. You take responsibility for what was within your control and adjust accordingly. This keeps momentum alive even during setbacks. People who avoid accountability often quit after failure because failure threatens their identity. Self-accountable people see failure as data, not a verdict. Most people rely on motivation or pressure to act. Self-accountable people rely on agreements they make with themselves. Once an agreement is made, it's treated as non-negotiable. This removes daily decision-making, which is where most people lose. You don't wake up and decide whether to show up. You already decided yesterday. That advanced commitment simplifies execution and reduces mental fatigue. There is also a compounding effect to self-accountability. Each time you follow through, you reinforce the belief that your word has weight. That belief increases confidence, not the loud kind, but the quiet confidence of self-trust. Over time, you stop needing reminders, rewards, or threats to act. You act because it's aligned with who you are. That identity-based discipline is extremely hard to compete with. Self-accountability is uncomfortable because it removes the safety net of excuses. You can't blame timing, resources, or other people without also acknowledging your role. Most people prefer the comfort of partial responsibility. Self-accountable people accept full responsibility even when it's unfair. That willingness gives them control. You can't control outcomes, but you can't control standards, effort, and response. Another reason self-accountability works is that it scales. External accountability has limits. Managers can only oversee so much. Systems can only track so much. Self-accountability has no ceiling. As responsibilities grow, standards stay intact. This is why self-accountable individuals often rise faster. They don't need micromanagement. They manage themselves. In the long run, self-accountability creates alignment. Your actions match your goals. Your behavior matches your values. There's less internal conflict because you're not constantly breaking promises to yourself. That internal alignment creates clarity and energy that others lack. While most people are negotiating with themselves every day, self-accountable people are executing. This is why self-accountability is such a powerful edge. It works quietly. There's no applause for it. No one sees the internal standards you maintain or the excuses you refuse to accept. But over time, those unseen decisions accumulate into visible results. When you hold yourself to a higher standard than anyone else does, you stop waiting for permission, pressure, or validation, and you become the kind of person who progresses regardless of circumstances. Most people underestimate how much their environment shapes their behavior. They believe discipline, motivation, and talent are the main drivers of success. But in reality, the world around them either supports their goals or sabotages them. Environment design is the silent force that determines whether you follow through on your plans or fall prey to distraction. Most people leave it to chance, which is why they rarely achieve the results they desire. Those who intentionally craft their surroundings gain an enormous advantage because they make success easier and failure harder. Environment influences behavior because humans are inherently reactive to cues. Every object, sound, and interaction carries signals that trigger habits. A clean workspace invites focus, while cluttered space invites procrastination. A social circle that celebrates achievement nudges you toward excellence, while a circle that excuses mediocrity nudges you toward stagnation. People tend to underestimate these subtle influences because they operate below conscious awareness, yet they shape 90% of daily behavior. Recognizing and optimizing your environment creates leverage that no amount of willpower alone can provide. Most people rely on willpower to fight against poor environments. They believe if they just try harder, they can overcome distractions, temptations, and negative influences. This is a trap. Willpower is finite and easily depleted. Over time, the environment wins because it requires less effort to conform than to resist. A person trying to eat healthy while living in a house full of junk food must constantly fight impulses. A person who removes temptation altogether does not need to fight. Environment design removes friction, making the right action easier than the wrong one. The right environment does more than reduce resistance. It actively promotes desired behavior. Visual cues, structured routines, and supportive networks all prime the mind to act in alignment with goals. Seeing a notebook and pen on the desk every morning reminds you to write. Having workout clothes laid out makes exercise easier to start. A friend group that prioritizes growth naturally reinforces habits you want to maintain. These cues don't demand motivation. They trigger automatic responses, which multiply your effectiveness without draining energy. Environment design also prevents decision fatigue. Most failures come not from lack of ability, but from poor daily choices. Every decision taxes mental energy. When your environment is poorly structured, it forces unnecessary choices. What to eat, what to work on, whether to check notifications. Each decision consumes willpower and leaves less capacity for the tasks that matter. Designing your environment to remove trivial decisions frees cognitive resources for high-impact work, which allows consistent performance over long periods. People who neglect environment design often overestimate their resilience. They believe discipline alone can carry them, but they fail to account for constant exposure to friction, distraction, and temptation. Humans are adaptive creatures. Repeated exposure to cues rewires behavior subconsciously. If the environment encourages mediocrity, habits naturally shift downward. Conversely, a strategically constructed environment nudges behavior upward without requiring heroic effort, creating leverage that compounds over time. Another key element is social environment. Who you spend time with determines what behaviors feel normal. People adopt habits, values, and expectations from those around them, often without realizing it. If your peers settle for average, the pressure to conform is constant and invisible. If your peers are ambitious, focused, and disciplined, excellence becomes the default expectation. Environment design is not just about physical space. It's also about people, conversations, and networks that shape identity and behavior. Environment can also be temporal and digital. The tools and platforms you use daily carry immense influence. Social media, entertainment, and even apps on your phone are designed to capture attention and waste time. Allowing these tools to dominate unregulated erodes productivity. Structuring time blocks, limiting access, or using tools intentionally converts these potential distractions into neutral or supportive elements. Small adjustments to digital habits prevent hours of wasted energy while reinforcing focus and consistency. Designing your environment is proactive, not reactive. Waiting for motivation or discipline to carry you in a poorly designed setting is unreliable. Successful people start by shaping their world to support their objectives. They remove friction, add triggers, and create spaces where the desired action is easier than the undesired one. This reduces reliance on fluctuating emotions, willpower, or luck. Success becomes a path of least resistance rather than a constant battle against circumstance. Finally, environment design compounds over time. Each day spent in a supportive environment reinforces habits, strengthens identity, and reduces resistance to effort. The person who invests in crafting their surroundings slowly turns consistency into a natural outcome. Those who ignore environment design fight upstream, wasting energy and reducing the likelihood of long-term achievement. Small adjustments, moving objects, changing routines, curating social circles, eliminating distractions, build invisible scaffolding that sustains performance, accelerates learning, and separates the few who achieve mastery from the many who remain average. Small improvements may seem insignificant in isolation, but their power lies in accumulation. Most people overestimate what they can achieve in a single effort and underestimate what consistent incremental progress produces over time. The truth is that massive results rarely come from sudden breakthroughs. They come from repeated, deliberate improvements, each building on the last, until the compound effect turns modest daily effort into extraordinary outcomes. Understanding this principle changes everything about how you approach growth, work, and success. Incremental improvement works because humans respond to repetition. Every time you refine a skill, tweak a process, or enhance knowledge, your brain and body adapt slightly. These micro-adjustments are invisible in the moment, but they add up exponentially. Most people fail to notice them because they expect dramatic change overnight. They chase big wins or radical hacks, ignoring that consistent tiny improvements stack into dominance over time. The person who improves 1% daily doesn't see the impact immediately, but after a year, they are 37 times better, a gap few others can bridge. Small improvements are sustainable. Major leaps often require intense bursts of effort that are difficult to maintain. People burn out chasing radical progress, convinced that extraordinary action is necessary. Incremental improvement avoids this trap. It requires less energy per step, which makes consistency easier. You don't need motivation or heroics. You just need to show up and refine. Over time, these small, manageable actions compound to produce results that appear miraculous in retrospect, even though they were earned through steady, unglamorous effort. The beauty of small improvements is also in their adaptability. When each step is minor, mistakes carry less risk. You can experiment, adjust, and optimize without catastrophic consequences. Large, dramatic moves carry high stakes. One misstep can derail progress completely. Incremental improvements reduce risk while keeping momentum. Each adjustment teaches feedback, guiding the next step. Most people fear making mistakes and therefore avoid improvement. The person who embraces tiny, consistent adjustments accelerates learning and builds resilience simultaneously. Small improvements also shift your identity. When you focus on refining behavior daily, your identity begins to align with progress. Writing a little more each day makes you a writer. Exercising consistently, even minimally, makes you an athlete. Improving processes daily makes you an athlete. Improving processes daily makes you competent and reliable. This identity reinforcement compounds over time, making effort feel natural and self-propelled. Most people underestimate this effect, believing effort is purely external. The internal transformation is often more powerful than the skills themselves. Incremental gains are particularly effective because most people abandon consistency too soon. They start strong, expecting immediate results. When progress feels slow, they quit or switch paths. Small, steady improvements are invisible to the impatient eye, which is why those who stick with them gain a massive edge. By the time others notice, the person who improved gradually has already passed them by an unbridgeable margin. The delay in visible outcomes is precisely what creates leverage. Compound improvement also creates psychological momentum. Each successful adjustment builds confidence, reinforcing the habit of improvement itself. Over time, this forms a cycle. Progress generates belief, belief generates effort, and effort generates further progress. Motivation becomes a byproduct, not a prerequisite. Most people rely on fleeting emotional spikes to act. Those who focus on incremental gains operate independently of mood. This consistency builds both results and self-trust, which further fuels progress. Another advantage is scalability. Small improvements are versatile across every domain. Skill acquisition, business growth, relationships, health, and mindset all respond to incremental progress. The principle is universal. Each micro-improvement creates leverage for the next. If a business optimizes one process slightly, the efficiency gains compound as operations expand. If a person increases strength by small amounts consistently, the body adapts in ways that prepare it for larger gains. The process is self-reinforcing and increasingly powerful. Small improvements also teach patience and discipline. Success is rarely instant. By embracing this slow accumulation of progress, you learn to tolerate delayed gratification, control impulses, and maintain focus despite temporary stagnation. Most people quit because they confuse lack of immediate reward with failure. Incremental improvement trains the mind to trust the process, value consistency, and act even when visible results are minimal. This mindset alone separates top performers from the majority, who drift without sustained direction. Finally, small improvements build resilience against setbacks. When progress is incremental, temporary failures are minor. They're simply part of the learning process. If a mistake happens, the person can correct it without losing all momentum. Large, dramatic efforts, by contrast, are fragile. Failure is catastrophic and discouraging. Incremental improvement creates a system where mistakes are absorbed and growth continues, allowing long-term success to become inevitable. The compounding nature of small improvements is the ultimate differentiator. Most people seek instant results, hoping for shortcuts or dramatic leaps. Few recognize that time, consistency, and incremental refinement are more powerful than any individual effort. By committing to continuous small improvements, you accumulate advantages that grow exponentially, creating gaps that others cannot overcome. Over years, what starts as a modest commitment transforms into expertise, influence, wealth, and capability that appear disproportionate to the effort involved. And this process quietly separates the top 1% from everyone else. If you want to beat 99% of people, it's not about being the smartest, the luckiest, or the most talented. It's about mastering the small, consistent actions that compound over time. embracing discomfort when others quit, and taking full ownership of your growth. While most are distracted by shortcuts, excuses, and instant gratification, you focus on the fundamentals, leverage patience, and relentlessly refine yourself every single day. Success isn't an accident. It's the natural outcome of those who endure, improve, and act when nobody's watching. And that is exactly how you rise above the rest.